Time management is dividing your time between specific activities so you are not rushing to finish certain tasks. Time management could be suggested as an element of organisation, but there are many other factors, such as how to prioritise things or situations, having a structure to training sessions, and making sure decisions are not rushed. During a training session of dance, for example, if the athlete is spending too much time trying to complete or perfect one skill, then it is the coach's role to manage the athlete's time, as it would be suitable if the athlete can't complete the skill to move on, as they would be neglecting the rest of their routine just to complete that one skill. It is better for the athlete who does dance to focus on a wide range of skills, as this would benefit their performance. However, in contrast, in a sport like snowboarding, the coach has to spend a lot of time on the one specific skill, because if the athlete doesn't do the skill right, then they could potentially injure themselves. So in this case, the coach would have to set aside a lot of time so that the athlete can perfect the skill. In addition to this, however, timings can become too fixed in a training session. So if the athletes were doing a shooting practice in netball, but the athletes had completed the skill perfectly, but the coach wanted them to keep going at it, then it's just wasting time where the athletes could be learning a new skill. In contrast, timings can be too flexible too, which is in relation to being unorganised. So this could also waste the athlete's time because the coach doesn't know what skill to teach next because there is no structure to the training session. Another aspect of time management is prioritising. This can be prioritising athletes by age or ability. An example of this is when a coach is coaching a range of age groups the same gymnastics skill. They might have to demonstrate or further explain the skill to children, as they might not be advanced as the older people, therefore spending more of their time with younger athletes. Furthermore, this links to the athlete's ability, as the coach might spend more of their time with athletes that don't really understand the skill and try and help them. On the other hand, coaches might spend all of their time with more advanced athletes to try and develop the skills further that they have learnt. But with this, there is a danger of forgetting the other athletes they are trying to coach. Communication is about listening and then responding to conveyed information someone has given you. How a coach can display communication can be different. This could be in the form of verbal communication, non-verbal communication, or even written communication. Verbal communication consists of having a clear voice, changing the tone and volume of your voice depending on the environment and situation you are in, the nature of the sport, and the ability of the players you are coaching. An example of this is if you were coaching a rugby team in an outside environment across a large distance, then to get the players' attention you would have to raise the volume of your voice so that every participant can hear the instructions you are trying to give. Likewise, it also depends on the nature of the sport, as rugby is notoriously known for being quite a loud sport when players are shouting across the pitch to communicate with their teammates, and the coach is shouting instructions from the sideline. Also, because of the nature of the sport, players might get motivated if their coach is shouting at them. However, shouting doesn't motivate all players. This is in contrast to darts, when the players are very focused and there is hardly any noise. So the players can hear their coach, and the coach doesn't have to raise the volume of their voice because it is a relaxed environment, so the coach doesn't need to use the shouting form of motivation, as this could distract the player. In addition to this, you have to change the volume and tone of your voice when it comes to who you are coaching and the ability of the participants. If a coach is teaching children in a basketball session, for example, then they have to have an assertive tone to their voice, as the children can get distracted and not listen, and the coach is consequently responsible for the safety of those children during that training session. Despite this, if a coach is teaching in an adults basketball session, then they can be a bit more relaxed, as the adults should know how to behave and should follow instructions they have been given. On the other hand, what is mentioned when a coach is given communication is important too. This is regarding tactics a coach wants a player to use, adjustments the coach wants the athlete to do when performing a skill, and the praise they give that athlete. For example, if a coach is coaching a tennis player and the athlete isn't performing the skill of serving correctly as it keeps going out, then the coach has to fix the problem. And probably the best way of doing this is by asking questions to the athlete, as then the athlete can process and evaluate the skill in their own mind so that they can think about resolving the problem for themselves. As a result, the player should learn from this and then should be able to improve the skill without guidance in the future. But coaches have to take into consideration that not every athlete likes being told what to do. So therefore, the coach needs to know the athletes personally so that they understand and have a strategy of how to convey information to them without causing offence. Also, when a coach praises their athlete, it is reinforcement for the athlete that they are doing well. In connection to this, it is important when and where and how often a coach communicates with their athletes, whether it is concurrent or terminal feedback, the frequency of the feedback, or if the feedback is public or one-to-one. This links to how well a coach knows their athlete, as public feedback could embarrass certain athletes. Similarly, some athletes might not need concurrent feedback as they are too distracted within a game situation like ice hockey. The forms of non-verbal communication are using a whistle, the body language of the coach, and that includes gestures and facial expressions. Non-verbal communication is often used during sports, where the nature of the sport is quite loud. In a game of netball, for example, a whistle is used when the umpire wants to get the player's attention or even speak to the coach. However, whistles aren't used in gymnastics, as the athletes require a huge amount of concentration so that they perform the skills correctly. So in contrast to what I said before about netball, the coach will probably use a different form of non-verbal communication like hand gestures to get in contact with their athletes, as this would be suitable and effective as their players can't always hear their coach from the sideline. A negative is if the coach has poor communication, whether that is the manner in how they speak to their athletes or not giving information when it is required. This could potentially put other athletes in danger. Also, when a coach is coaching children, then the children's parents are involved as well. So the coach needs to be able to communicate with the children's parents and give information regarding training sessions and fixtures. An example of poor communication is if a coach was in a situation where a child got hurt during a rugby fixture and they weren't remaining calm and giving clear information to the athlete or the people around them that needed to get help. Another example of poor communication is that if a coach got angry at an umpire's decision and started yelling during a badminton match, as this could hinder their own athlete's performance because the umpire might become biased just because the coach has poor communication with them. Organisation is the act of being organised. It involves planning ahead, arrangement and management so that you know what you are doing and when you are doing it. This applies to a coach as they have to be organised in a lot of things, which includes arranging fixtures and training sessions for athletes, supplying officials for matches, which ties in with organising the venue and facilities for their athletes, but also the opposing team. They have to make sure that everyone has transport to fixtures and everyone gets there safely. Another factor is that they need to have emergency contacts with them, especially if their team is going to an away fixture. And this is important when a coach is organised, if that be before, during or after a training session or match situation. When a coach is organising a training session, it would be useful and suitable if they were organised before the session. For example, if they were coaching children in a badminton session, then it would be an advantage if they set all the equipment up before the children arrived, as this would allow the coach to focus all their attention on the children instead of worrying about the equipment or where the equipment would be placed. Also, there is a safety element as well. So if all the equipment is set up and mapped out in the correct places, then there are less hazards for the coach and children to be aware of. Similarly, the content of the training session has to be organised. This includes the drill structure, what skills the participants will actually be completing. Another factor that the coach has to take into consideration is the group size, because if the coach has a large group of adults to coach in badminton, then they are less likely than children to want to immediately go play with the equipment. They have more self-control and would probably stand or sit and wait for the coach's instructions. Whereas, on the other hand, if the coach was coaching a large group of children in football, then I don't think they would have self-control and they would want to go play with the equipment. In addition to organising groups, the coach can organise a group of athletes that are doing an individual sport like horse riding or a team sport like handball, depending on the athlete's ability. So each group would get set a task that would be appropriate for each individual's ability. Also, the coach has to bear in mind the behaviour and attitudes of their athletes. So if a coach is teaching a range of different age groups netball, some athletes might be more competitive than others. Therefore, the coach might separate groups depending on how competitive the athletes are. This is because then the players that are there for a bit of fun, have fun, and don't feel pressure of keeping up with athletes that might be a bit more aggressive and more competitive than them. Organising emergency contacts is vital as the coach is in charge of the participant's safety. An example of when it is necessary is that if someone gets injured in a sport like American football, where it is a highly contact sport. The coach needs to firstly have organised contacts for emergency services so that the athlete can get the help. But then they have to organise the other athletes in that situation, as sometimes it can be distressing to others to see a teammate in pain. In contrast, a coach should carry out a risk assessment after the match to analyse the potential hazards, then correct them so no one else gets injured. A disadvantage is if a coach is not organised. An example of this would be if it was raining and a rugby pitch got waterlogged, but the coach hadn't organised an alternative venue for the teams to play at, as this doesn't just affect their own team but the opposition as well. In addition to this, if a coach hadn't organised an official to umpire a tennis match,